Pick one.
Which one is
This
ours?
one.
Which
No,
one is mine?
this one. This one right here. All close to me here. So, what's new?
You tell me. I haven't been here the last day.
You've had.
I hear we came up a few times.
Yes, you came up a few times. It's a topic. It's interesting to the media. Obviously, it's interesting to me as a person involved, and Peter. All right, let's talk about where you are right now. What's happening right now? Why don't you give us an update of what happens from here in the case, and then we can get into Peter Thiel and other issues.
There's a hearing on June 10th down in Florida, probably the last hearing in the state court. The state court where we got the $140 million verdict against the company, myself, and AJ Delario, the author of a 2012 post on Hulk Hogan. So that would probably be the last hearing in front of this particular judge, and then it goes to the appeals court.
And then what happens in that hearing?
Predictable things, but we're not expecting any particular favors from this judge.
Meaning then it has to move. You have to appeal it to the next.
Yeah, the one thing that people forget about this whole saga is that it was actually before a federal judge, before it was at the state court, and it's been in front of the appeals court on several occasions, and the federal judge deemed it newsworthy, found for us, and the appeals court has repeatedly ruled in our favor. So we're pretty confident that once we actually get it in front of a higher court, in front of the judges at the higher court, that they'll find it in our favor,
and
or reduce very significantly what is clearly an outsized verdict.
So what does that mean until then? You have to pay this money, or it goes in escrow, or what happens?
It's complicated.
All right. I'm not stupid, but what?
Florida has an interesting. Do people really want to hear?
I think what's going to happen to your company, because it reflects on what do you do? You have this money that you need to use.
There is a bond rule in Florida.
So you have to put up
which
the money.
Basically says you have to put up. I think they're arguing. Peter Thiel's lawyers are arguing that it's $50 million for the company, $50 million for me, and $50 million for AJ Delario, the writer.
So how long before this case is resolved? And you have others you face now.
This particular case, I think general reckoning is it takes about 9 months to get to the appeals court. The issue here is not really so much a question of law or facts. It's just the incredible expense and time that it takes to go through every stage of the process, and some of the rather bizarre rules that you encounter along the way. And in that kind of environment, it's pretty easy for a deep-pocketed backer, somebody who funds lawsuits, to make it very taxing in terms of money and time.
I think that's the point here of what's happening.
I heard there was a discussion of champati.
Yes, it was.
I'm not sure whether I pronounced that correctly. I actually wasn't even aware of the name and the phrase until last week, but I've had an education.
So let's talk about that deep-pocketed investor in these lawsuits. You had talked to me about thinking it was someone like this, that something else was going on previously. Were you surprised by this?
Peter Thiel was one of the people that I thought it could be, and we believed that there was some secret backer, or it was likely there was some secret backer, just because the Hulk Hogan was not, and actually, frankly, some of the other plaintiffs that Peter Thiel's lawyer is representing, that they weren't acting as plaintiffs who were seeking a financial return. There's just one example. Hulk Hogan actually downgraded his claim for emotional distress, which actually reduces the ultimate payout that he would get if he was successful. But eliminated that claim in order to obviate our insurance, in order to bypass.
They have a lot of money. Because they have a lot of money to fight him, correct?
Well, because if you're Peter Thiel and you have a lot of money and you're up against an insurance company, That's different than if you're Peter Thiel with a lot of money up against a company which is then naked and without an insurer to pay for the bills.
I see. So you talked about this idea that it was someone, and it turns out that was the case.
Yeah, I was surprised that it came out as quickly as it did.
Really? Why is that?
Well, because there was nothing really to, it was very hard to actually identify the person. I wonder whether, I suppose there were questions, there was speculation. We were getting rumors, and sure, we were passing on rumors, but most of what we heard was just from the grapevine. So, and I had various other people that we were on the list of people who had the means and maybe the motive.
Is it a long list?
It was maybe 3 or 4 people.
Who are the other people you thought?
I'm not going to go into that.
I can guess. So, in this case,
we should just talk. We spoke about it about a week before.
People you have wronged, or people feel wronged by you, or however you want to phrase it. Lots of people. People that would do something about it.
But you thought that Thiel. We were in a hypothetical. I was like, yes, he would do that. There was a list of who is mad at you, which is long. Yeah.
And then there was a list of people who would do something about it, who would think about doing something about it. It was long. And then there were people who would actually do something about it.
And then there's people who have the money and the mindset.
Yes, the money
and the motive. And
would do it, would actually pull the trigger.
Would
pull the trigger. Yes, it's a shorter list.
It was extraordinary. It was hard to believe that. I found it. For a long time, people were suggesting this, and I was like, that can't be true. And actually, even just to think about it, that way lies madness, conspiracy theories. I've never actually been a believer in conspiracy theories because I think usually people are too loose-lipped and conspiracy theories come out. In this particular instance, it has taken several years for this to come out.
It's a 10-year thing that's been going on here.
I'm not exactly sure what was the prompt for Peter Thiel. He hasn't been particularly.
So what do you think it was? I mean, obviously, you wrote a story.
Well, what he said is that there were friends of his that suffered as a result of reporting on Gawker and Valleywag. I'm paraphrasing here. And so, who are his friends who've been reported extensively on Sean Parker. We did a story on the streets where he has a house in Manhattan being dug up for a Fios cable to be put in. And his neighbors were unhappy about that. We did stories about the wedding and the complaints by environmental organizations that the Redwoods
many people covered.
The fact is that many people have covered all of these stories. One of the other lawsuits that Peter Thiel's lawyer is backing. Peter Thiel hasn't confirmed that he's the funding behind this, but his lawyer is is representing the plaintiff. Is this guy Shiva?
What do you imagine?
Shiva Ayyadurai.
What do you imagine the agenda is for him, and is he justified in getting back at you? He called it a philanthropy, but I think we can all agree he's mad at you.
Well, it's a little hard. I mean, if he was sitting here, we could just talk about it. And I don't think he's very active on Twitter. So, all we really have is Andrew Ross Sorkin's interview with him, in which he was talking about people who had their lives ruined by coverage on Gawker and Valleywag. And in which he talked about his friends specifically, but without naming them. I mean, there's Sean Parker, there's Keith Rabois, who's been covered pretty extensively. But that's pretty much all that we know. And then there's criticism of Peter Thiel himself. People have focused on the story in which we noted, in fact, in which Owen Thomas, who's I think sitting here, noted that Peter Thiel is the most prominent and successful gay venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, which certainly at the time was a straight
Well, let's talk about that story.
Preserve.
I mean,
but actually, we should talk about others too, because there's been extensive coverage of his political views.
Yes, absolutely.
Been much more critical.
Right. So one of the things that's been interesting to me is how much support he's gotten in Silicon Valley, and how many people think.
I'm not surprised by that.
Well, okay. But that so many people think you completely deserve this, that you all went beyond the pale. I got emails from lots of people who think you've wronged them. This one is from Pat Pax Dickinson. You remember Pax?
Who tweeted and was then fired as CTO of Business Insider.
Yes, exactly.
And we committed the great offense of doing stories about the tweets that got him fired.
Have you ever had a sleepless night because you regretted something Gawker published or hurt someone? Do you think Gawker's business model depends on hurting people? And would Gawker be where it is today if it had not profited from hurting people? Secretly recording yourself and your partner having sex without his knowledge, then publishing the tape, is that sex abuse? I don't get emails like this a lot.
Well, let's talk about, do you want to summarize Pax Dickinson's?
He thinks you're an asshole.
Yeah, okay, but do you want to summarize what the stories were?
I don't remember them. A lot of them I don't remember. It was around, I don't remember.
News, when news gets out, people's careers can suffer. They can be shunned, they can be criticized. But you've got to determine where does responsibility lie? How is it shared? In the case of Pax Dickinson, was it his tweets that we reported on? Does he have some responsibility for what he wrote? Is Henry Blodgett and the management at Business Insider responsible for, if it was unfair that he got fired for those tweets, what responsibility do they hold? We are the messenger.
All right, but that's not true. That's not true.
And a lot of people actually would...
I know you say you're the messenger, but there's a tone and tonality to what you're doing.
Oh yeah,
and we've had dinner after dinner where we disagree.
We're snarky messengers. That's
right.
Gawker.com. I mean, the other properties are
we'll talk about the other
rather different. But Gawker.com has certainly been a home, amid a often rather deferential and fawning press. It has been a home for critical thinking, critical coverage, and often a critical tone. And that's absolutely clear.
That's one thing.
So the stories do and can.
Yes, that is one thing, but I get the deferential tone, I get the cheerleading part, and you and I have had dinner after dinner, we argued about this, and your husband, by the way, agrees with me almost completely. Which
is why you like him so much.
You say to me, you know a lot of things, you don't publish them, you should. Even if you know partial things, you should publish them. Remember, we talked about rumors and things like that. You should publish them even if you don't know, and I'm like, you're fucking nuts.
No, I don't agree with that.
No, we did have that argument. That is absolutely true. Remember, you said if you know parts of things, you should get it out there.
Show me the tapes.
Oh, God. You did. I'm going to bring Darren in for this one. But we have a different opinion about what's
Look, I definitely believe...
You all definitely do stuff.
I definitely believe, for instance, let's take the Facebook coverage on Gizmodo.
Right.
Gizmodo did a story.
Yes.
It was a very well-researched, documented story, but it was a partial story based on two, I think, anonymous sources. And it's a story that then drove the entire coverage of how Facebook chooses the news, how it's maybe not quite as automatic and algorithmic as people have been led to believe, how human bias can sneak into the process. Now,
wish we had it.
I don't believe that if we hadn't done that first excellent but partial story, I don't believe that the reporting would have, like now we have a much collectively we have a much better idea of how Facebook works.
Absolutely.
And so I mean,
but that's very
it's what I call
different than publishing Peter Thiel is gay people, like, right? Is that so we wouldn't do that.
Did you know that Peter Thiel was gay?
I did.
Okay. And how many people do you think in Silicon Valley at that time knew?
No idea.
Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands?
A number of people.
Number of people.
Yeah.
So at what point is something sufficiently well known, at least among the elite, that it is newsworthy, that it is publishable?
My point is it newsworthy? Does it matter? I mean, if it was something that would be where I would say, and lots of things. Like, for example, let's be clear. You've written fantastic stories, and that's where I think is the problem for a lot of journalists. You've written fantastic stories, and then some of them.
We overstep the mark sometimes.
Yes, some of them have, I'm not clear why you need to Photoshop Sheryl Sandberg with a shotgun. Like, I don't get it. Like, it's just mean.
Was it a joke? It was a bad joke?
It was a bad joke. It was a bad joke. Well, maybe.
I'm sorry.
Some people
sometimes they don't.
Don't apologize to me. I'm not Sheryl Sandberg, but sometimes it goes beyond the pale to a place that then engenders this kind of anger, which then results in this.
We're pretty much the only independent digital media company. We got to scale and we got to profitability, self-funded, without outside capital, at least until the legal bills started to mount, and we raised money earlier this year. And we've been a company of journalists. I'm a former journalist. The company has a very journalistic mission, and the mission is to take, it's a mission of honest conversation about the news, and all of the things that make us good are also the things that sometimes cause us to overstep the mark. Let's just take the honesty. Mm-hmm. The honesty, I believe, reviews of products, whether it's cars or video games or gadgets, our stories, we try to be as candid to our writers, try to say what they think, what they know. And then sometimes the flip side of that is that sometimes honesty and truth can be a cloak in which one is merely shielding obnoxiousness. That it's like the person who just, who says something rude and then they're criticized for that and saying, well, I was just being honest.
Right.
And so that is the flip side, and I cop to that.
All right, cop to that is different. You're suffering for it for now. I mean, you're actually, you're moving out of your apartment, you're getting sued all over the place, possibility of bankruptcy. This is like you're paying for something.
Our readers and we have benefited from the honesty and the fearlessness of the Gawker writers, and yes, and now we're paying a price for some of the stories that people.
I get that, but it's a little like Peter Thiel's ridiculous canard that this is philanthropy. Like, look, it's fine to say I'm pissed at these guys. It's a vendetta. I'm going to get them. I'm good with that. Like, okay, you're an asshole, but go right ahead. But the same thing to say that you're fearless, sometimes it's just mean. Like, you know what I mean? We argue about this all the time.
And sometimes fearlessness.
I'm not known as someone who's that nice. So this is coming from someone who has a reputation of being not so nice. There is a point where, we talked a little bit about Marissa Mayer. I'm super tough on her. Really tough. I think she can't stand me. The fact of the matter is I don't write about her personal life. I don't write about her clothes or her whatever, all the personal stuff that's now coming out, I find objectionable. And some people would call it newsworthy. I don't think it's newsworthy. I think it's
sometimes it absolutely does bleed into gossip.
Right.
I think if you think about how do people talk amongst themselves,
right,
in the elite, whether you're talking about LA or New York or Silicon Valley. And actually, a lot of the stories are not the stories that appear in the newspaper. Right. They are the stories about, well, actually how so-and-so is getting the blame for that bad acquisition, and they're on their way out. And in fact, this thing that looked like a promotion wasn't like a promotion. Right. And actually, that's usually the truer version of what's going on. And I think in Silicon Valley, there's a the tension is particularly extreme.
Absolutely. Let's get into that topic, because that's a very good example, and I'll bring it back to two examples. For example, with Marissa Mayer, we wrote about her demotion at Google. She was not happy about that, but it was a demotion, no matter how you sliced it. Not very unhappy.
And we've written about the throne that she sat on at the Yahoo party.
I don't care about her throne.
Whatever.
I don't care about her throne. And then at the same time, I'd read about a demotion. I find that to be newsworthy. And then when she fell asleep and didn't make that meeting, they leaked that to me first. And I thought, well, Google executives miss meetings all the time, and they're jerky about it, or Facebook executives. Why is she getting dinged anymore? And I felt it was sexist. I thought it was possibly vindictive, and I didn't publish it. And the Wall Street Journal did. So, people are always deciding newsworthy things all the time, like what's newsworthy.
And none of us get it right all the time.
Do you regret some of the things that you've deemed newsworthy that maybe aren't so much newsworthy and just kind of salacious gossip? It's not really salacious, but just gossip. Some of it's salacious.
We've published a million stories on the Gawker brands over the last.
Give me an example. One where, the guy.
Well, there's an obvious example,
right,
which is the story which I had taken down. Because it was another outing story. Mm-hmm. I don't actually think that the political significance of outing.
Why did you take that down? Why versus writing the Peter Thiel?
He was a largely private individual. He had a C in his title, and he shared a surname with somebody famous. But he was a largely private individual. He hadn't expressed himself on any issue that was kind of connected with his sexuality or his family life. He showed up less frequently on a Google search than most of our writers, and I couldn't see the point in the story. And when people like you and Glenn Greenwald and people who are generally believers in press freedom criticized it, and I agreed with you. I had the
All right,
had the
make
story
the
taken
argument then for Peter Thiel writing that he's gay.
Widely known. Knew who his boyfriend was. It was widely known in the gay community. It was widely known in Silicon Valley, and
What's the
I don't think it is a shame.
I don't either.
I don't think it is a shame, and the people who seem to be most sensitive about outing, at least judging from Twitter, are actually straight people. It's actually strange that I think if you're gay and you saw the only public figures who were gay were actors and maybe a few executives in the entertainment industry, many of them sort of half in the closet, half out. Silicon Valley, despite it proclaiming itself to be such a tolerant and open place, had almost no people in any positions of power who were known in the media to be gay. It was known within Silicon Valley. I just don't see that.
So you believe that's...
I don't see it as possible. I don't see it as possible to kind of maintain that. And when something is in the modern world, when something is widely known,
But he reached the test because he was famous. That's basically what you're saying. Is he's well known.
Famous, and it was already known, amongst in his circle.
Okay. I mean, I think that unfortunately it's really hard to decide what's new in that regard.
It is hard, yeah.
What about what someone else wrote me about a girl who had sex in a bathroom? You published a video.
That was a terrible story.
How did that get? But see, these get on your site. So who's responsible for it? Is it a culture you created? Have you changed? What's the?
Yeah, we've absolutely tightened up. That was about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Let's look at the bigger picture here. It's a story we had taken down. It was a video that had appeared elsewhere. It was in a public place, but not. It was a story that should not have been published. There's a huge amount of information coming out onto social networks, onto Twitter, onto Facebook. Everything is our communications are recorded. It's very easy for somebody, if you text the wrong person, it's very easy for them just simply to take that and post it up online or to send it to some journalist. So we're actually living in an environment in which there's vastly more information. Ashley Madison, there are millions of families that could have been wrecked by that information getting out in public, and it was out in public. It was available to be searched on.
So you're just saying that's the way it is? There isn't some editorial judgment that
Well, I think it actually calls for much more editorial judgment now. There's a lot more information to sift through. Before, if you got hold of information and it was true and it was interesting, if information was in sufficiently short supply, that usually that would be information that you post up. Like now, I think we all have more responsibility because there's just more stuff to choose from.
What changed? I mean, for you, unfortunately, it's too late in a lot of ways because you're caught in this lawsuit because of behaviors. You now say we have to be more responsible.
I think arguably it was too late for us in 2007 if Peter Thiel began his vendetta back then. But I think it's right that we be held to account for our journalism. I think it's right that everybody be held to account for their journalism.
So
I think it's right also that the social media platform must be held to account for the information and for the bullying and the harassment, and they are held to account.
Many people think you are. I mean, that's bullying.
Please keep it in perspective.
Yeah.
There are high schools throughout this country that in which, like, whether you're talking about Kik or Facebook or Twitter, that there are bullying scandals every single day of the week across the country, across the world, because there are the barrier to
on the tools on these platforms.
The barriers just aren't there.
Let's talk about that because one of the people we wanted to have here, and we've just got a few minutes and we'll get questions, was Keith Rabois, and he was willing to do it, but he had to go to a Reddit board meeting, and I said, "You're fucking kidding me? Like Reddit, like the cesspool, like it can be, like can you defend that versus this?" Because he had his opinion about what you're doing, because it can be. There's all kinds of controversies around Reddit. And he said, Reddit's a reflection of the American people. It's a platform.
Well, we're all platforms.
But he was trying to distinguish between editorial and, hey, we're just here, we've made a platform. And we can't control everything people say.
Well, so the platforms use the safe harbor provisions to defend the fact that people put up obnoxious stuff, pornographic, pedophile porn on Reddit, that they defend that as being, okay, nothing to do with us, we're just a platform. If it needs to be taken down, it will be taken down.
Right.
And the press uses the First Amendment. There's much less of that kind of material that actually makes its way out certainly onto mainstream news sites and onto blogs and to journalistic platforms. But there is a parallel there. There's a lot more stuff coming out. There's a lot more stuff that's kind of coming into us, that's coming onto the platforms. And we all need to look at how to judge whether it's newsworthiness or by other standards.
Or it's just out there. You can't really control it. Let's talk about lastly.
But I think we're all under some kind of we have some responsibility for what we share.
Okay. Silicon Valley, powerful people.
Yeah.
People in Hollywood, Wall Street, New York, media seem used to the attacks that they get. They consider them attacks, the gossip.
Yeah, I mean, Page Six or TMZ, pretty familiar institutions in New York and Hollywood. Yeah.
Right. I've been on Page Six, by the way. I don't know if you know.
I've been extensively on Page Six myself.
Yeah, have you? They thought I was having a baby with Jeff Bezos. That was nice.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, when I was pregnant.
Did you correct them?
I said it was Rupert Murdoch's gay son. So, and they said, they freaked out. So they didn't quote me on that. I was just trying. It was fascinating. I was horrified, and it was terrible. It was a terrible experience because it was untrue. I had to tell my family about being pregnant much more quickly than I wanted to. I was pissed off. I didn't do anything about it. I let it go, kind of thing. You're of the mind that Silicon Valley people are too thin-skinned. I completely agree with you. Talk about that very briefly, and then we'll get to questions.
They're just not used to it. And the money is relatively new, and the power is relatively new. And we're in this situation where the rich seem, at least to much of the outside world, to be kind of controlling things from the shadows, funding lawsuits secretly, special purpose vehicles, offshore accounts, whatever it is. They can exercise power very discreetly. A Silicon Valley billionaire is 100 times, 1,000 times more powerful than the average congressman, and yet subject to a fraction of the scrutiny and accountability of somebody with that more classic version of power. Yeah, and then on the other hand, the people are monitored, often by companies that these Silicon Valley billionaires are themselves investors in or executives at. The people are monitored more than they've ever been. Often it's voluntary, but movements, friends, social profile. You can tell whether somebody is gay or not just by looking at their Facebook friends. That all of this information is out there. I think there's an imbalance, and it's part of the way in which that balance is kind of corrected is part of it is through news and journalism and gossip, that people want to know what the powerful are doing. They can't expect to hide entirely in the shadows, and particularly if they're actually using the media to put out their own views, their own political views, as Peter Thiel has often done. I don't think people really accept that they can just stay in the background and pull strings from behind the scenes.
So your issue is his secretiveness in doing it.
Yeah.
What if he had done it out loud, said, Nick Denton, I'm going to get you, I'm going to take you down, and I'm going to spend lots of money doing so.
I suppose that would have been probably better than doing it entirely in secret. I think the best thing is some others have they've founded and funded media criticism sites, media sites to watch and to monitor Fox News and to point out inaccuracies or to allow for some kind of counter argument. That seems like a constructive approach to take. And or set up a legal fund for all victims of privacy intrusions by media or social media for that matter. And don't make it about the issue rather than making it about a personal vendetta.
Is there something you regret in this for yourself?
I think the fearlessness of Gawker, it gave us, that's why we get 4 million people coming every single weekday to Gawker and the other properties. It's why we've broken more stories, writer for writer, pound for pound, than I think pretty much any other digital news organization. But to take on as many enemies as we did, I think journalistically, I'm proud of that. But in business terms, as we've seen.
And what aren't you proud of?
What?
Of what you've done?
I've tried, but it's hard to come out with stories which have some kind of balance. So you take that Marissa Mayer being late for a meeting. Like my idea of the best way to cover that kind of story is to say, yes, she was late for a meeting. Yes, the advertisers thought that was disrespectful. She's not the only one who's ever been in that situation. To try to go down, to show a bit of nuance. And the unfortunate fact is that nuance does not play, or has not, at least until recently, played in the media marketplace. If you put a story, can I give one little example?
Sure, I've got a question from John.
We did a story about there was a heartwarming tale of a kitten stuck up a tree, rescued by a firefighter. It was one of the kind of classic viral story. And unfortunately, the kitten died. The next day, the kitten died from smoke inhalation. And we actually had a public discussion about the story at Gawker because we included the fact that the kitten had died, the nuanced story. The nuanced story does not do as well as the story about either the tragedy or the heroism. The one-note story almost always beats the nuanced story. And that is, I'm not going to blame social media algorithms for that, because that's ultimately a reflection of what people want, what kind of headlines they click on. And they click on the straightforward ones.
Last quick question, then we'll get to Josh. Is Gawker going to have to declare bankruptcy? Are you considering declaring bankruptcy?
We're looking at all possible outcomes. We have a whole bunch of hearings to go. So far, what we've done is we've hired Mark Patrikov to advise us on strategic options. And interestingly enough, actually last week, I don't really understand how this works, but after all the news last week and Peter Thiel's his appearance from backstage in this story, we got a whole bunch of inbound interest. So that was interesting.
Hey, Nick, how are you? Two questions, very different. So the first is about your responsibility. Going back to the case that you were talking about where you took down the story on the C-suite, relatively not notable C-suite executive. You've been very good at skirting around responsibility. You created an environment for your editors and writers where you push them to tell those kinds of stories, right? To out people or to go beyond what might be the average or expected story. And yet you had this kind of like fallout where a lot of editors left, some business people left around the same time. Do you feel like, do you think you've accepted an appropriate amount of responsibility for that? Do you feel regret over how that played out publicly?
I think the motto of one of the editors at the time was, we put true facts on the internet. And I definitely feel that we wanted to have a clear, focused mission to put out stories that were true and interesting, and not to be bound, like many media organizations are, by a list, either explicit or implicit, of all the people who can't be covered because of the relationships, because of business relationships, because they're friends of friends or something like that. And we set writers free. And yes, I take responsibility for not recognizing always what the consequences of that kind of freedom were. That in amidst all of the awesome stories, that wouldn't have been published anywhere else, that needed to be published, all of the stories that actually got people talking, got other people following, that there are stories that among them that I'm not proud of, that did step over the mark. We were wild. And a lot of that was good, and some of that wasn't.
And so but the environment you created, you would say that you were in a different place than you are right now in terms of the environment you want at Gawker, right?
I think I'm in a different place. I think the media market is in a different place. That people have gotten we're saturated. In the early days of blogs, you had mainstream media, and then you had some criticism from the side, from the blogs, and it was very refreshing. It was new and it was refreshing. And then Twitter came along, and social media, and a tidal wave of a deluge of information and criticism and meanness and online bullying. And I think we reached some point where, I mean, I don't even go into at mentions on Twitter. What's the point in going? You're just going to put yourself in it.
For you, it must be a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
Well, Gamergate activists.
You're not well liked on Twitter.
So I have one more. It'll be quick. So let's say the apocalyptic situation occurs. Peter Thiel brings Gawker to its knees. You guys are out of money. Then he buys you. Whatever. Gawker's dead. You've been doing this a long time. Would you go get some money and start a new media company? Would you do this again, or are you going to like a soft consulting gig somewhere?
Gawker, remember, he's after Gawker.com. And Gawker Media is a group of 7 properties. I don't think that anyone has any particular antagonism towards Gizmodo or to Jezebel or to Kotaku or to Deadspin.
Kotaku, I think you could find some.
Oh yeah, actually, sorry, the Gamergate
they can raise some money.
Do not like the was it the social justice journalism that Kotaku does. I believe in the importance of an independent media, and I think an independent media is probably more important now than it has ever been. The public figures are more discreet, richer, and arguably more powerful than they've ever been. Wealth is certainly much more concentrated, and the power that it brings can be exercised from behind the scenes. And meanwhile, the media, most of the digital media companies are not profitable. They're dependent on outside capital. The newspapers lost their classifieds revenue stream. So the public figures are richer and more powerful, and the news media is poorer and less powerful than it's been in a long, long time. So I think that it's for the good of society. There needs to be a counterbalance. There needs to be some criticism, even if the billionaires don't like it. And that's the world that I want to live in.
You're not going anywhere, is what you're saying.
Well, I'll tell you what I would like to do. I'd like to find a way to more easily to be critical and at the same time recognize in the same piece or in the same discussion, recognize that somebody who's being criticized isn't all bad. That I'd like to find a way for nuance to work a little bit more effectively in a commercial media setting.
Okay.
Exactly how many lawsuits do you think he is bankrolling? And how many settlements have you had to pay confidentially that you think he is now responsible for?
His lawyer, Charles Harder, that he's confirmed that he has the association with Charles Harder. This is the lawyer in the Hulk Hogan case. Charles Harder is also associated with a case by Ashley Terrell. Actually, it involves a story about Sean Rad, who was on stage just before. As a journalist who had a dirt file on Sean Rad's co-founder, didn't like the fact that she ended up being featured in the story. She's suing us, I forget for how much. The other case is actually the most telling. This is Shiva Ayadurai, a man who claims that he invented email about a decade after email was invented. He is suing us for defamation. This was a story that was also covered in the Washington Post and in other places. These are the victims, the so-called victims, I presume that Peter Thiel is referring to. He hasn't confirmed that he is the money behind them, but he has confirmed that he is behind the lawyer who is behind them.
But are there others we don't know about? You must be being sued by others that we don't know.
No, actually, those are the main ones. We don't.
What about settlements?
What about settlements?
You settled
Previous.
last year with the case you're talking about, for example.
That was I think that's the only one that I can think of.
Do you think Thiel was behind that settlement?
I don't have any confirmation. What I'd like to know, and if he was on stage, I'd just ask him. It's like, are you behind the Ashley Terrell suit?
Right.
Are you behind the Shiva Ayadurai suit? Why do you believe that these people were victims? These people were subjects of stories that they didn't like. A lot of people are subjects of stories that they don't like. If you start to look at anybody who doesn't like a story as being a victim, and if you fund a campaign of legal harassment against a company that you believe victimized them, then there won't be that much independent media left in the country.
Last one.
Hey, Nick.
It's all your fault.
Yes, I'm just going to make a statement. Sorry. No, I do have a question. You removed yourself from direct editorial management, actually giving your president, Heather Dietrich, direct oversight of the sites. Can you talk about that decision and more of the aftermath of the vote that you took as a management collective about the takedown of the Post? Because most of the people who were actually involved in that decision have left the company since, right?
Yeah, we had a difference we had a difference. People might look at me as being kind of on the extreme of radical journalism, but we had some radical journalists who were maybe even more radical than I am. Heather Dietrich, our general counsel, has been involved in our editorial decision making by virtue of the fact that the stories are run past her and past her team, and so she has, I think, both a great perspective. She's a firm believer in the First Amendment, a great believer in the journalism that we do. She's an excellent lawyer, and she has the trust of the editorial within the company because she goes to bat for them when the stories should be gone, when we should go to bat for them.
Okay. Last question. Were you surprised that Jeff Bezos, because you've been pretty vile to him, supported you?
I think we've been critical of Amazon.
You call him tiny-fingered, but okay, whatever. Go ahead. What?
I think Trump has been called a short-fingered vulgarian, hasn't he? So
yeah, we've got to find out.
We must have been reusing an older.
Look,
he seems like a wise man to me. If you have that much power, and he has both economic power, controlling the most important retail network in the world. He has media power with his ownership of the Washington Post. And I think it's smart to recognize that the new power, like the old power, will have legitimacy insofar as it does allow criticism. It allows people to vent. It allows for a bit of transparency. It doesn't keep things in secret and responds with words to other words, with arguments to criticism, rather than with the bullying power of money.
Very last question. Do you think you should have published that Hulk Hogan sex videotape? Would you regret that?
This was a story that was deemed newsworthy by a federal judge, which we believe.
I'm not talking about newsworthy by a federal judge. Do you think you should have published it?
I think the story, he's such a, just think about it in the broadest terms, before it became a cause celebre. We had no blowback from that piece when it was published. Here was somebody, a reality star, a massively public figure, somebody being public about his sex life, extremely public about his sex life. And somebody who had talked about this sex tape. He talked about it before, he talked about it after, he boasted, he made excuses for his performance. This is somebody who's made this part of his persona. So if you're ever going to do a story about somebody's sex tape, then that's the kind of person you do the
So
story
yes,
about. I think the story's fine.
okay. Nick Denton.